Regulation of fluid pools. Baroreceptors can sense changes in the blood volume. They pick up changes in pressure. Under low pressure, we have certain sensors like the atrial stress receptors inside your heart. We also have the juxtaglomerular apparatus, the JG cells, as well as baroreceptors located inside our CNS, liver, and pulmonary veins. We also have a series of high pressure sensors, the carotid sinus baroreceptors, the aortic arch baroreceptors, and of course the renal afferent arterioles. These are all cells that can pick up changes in the blood pressure and blood flow, and therefore send signals to respond to that. There's also a concept of the hemodynamic control, which is the changes in the blood volume without directly changing in the osmolarity. On the right, you can see the aortic arch, ascending aorta and descending aorta. We have the baroreceptors right at the arch region, and then we also have the sinus baroreceptors as it goes up into the right common carotid and the left common carotid arteries, as well as different baroreceptors found inside the renal system and the kidneys. Changes in plasma volume. Extrinsic controls involve physiological changes to change the GFR to adjust our urine output based on whatever our physiological needs are. We have sympathetic and we also have parasympathetic control. Sympathetic stimulation can cause the JG cells to release renin, and eventually that gets converted into angiotensin-2, and thus stimulating the mesangial cells to contract. That also result in a decrease in surface area of the filtration, and therefore ultimately a decrease in the GFR. So when you have a decrease in GFR, you're going to have less urine being excreted out of the body. Another hormone that we'll talk about is called the AMP, atrial natriuretic peptide. AMP is released from the cardiac muscle cells in the blood in response to chamber distensions and causes the relaxation of the afferent arteriole. The goal of this hormone is to inhibit the release of renin, resulting in an increase in filtration membrane and therefore increasing GFR. This will then ultimately lead to an increase of urine volume and a decrease in blood volume. So AMP does the exact opposite. So let's take a look at two conditions. Under normal level, when your blood volume is really, really high on the right side, above the normal level, there's going to be stretching because there's more blood inside your blood vessels, causing the stretch to the atria. That will then cause an increase in AMP. AMP will then target the kidneys, which will then affect the amount of renin being released. And it's going to cause vasodilation of the afferent arteriole and the vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole. This will then increase more blood to go into the kidneys to increase GFR. GFR increases, therefore increasing urine production. As urine production goes up, you're going to pee more, and therefore the blood volume should drop down. So the end goal is to reduce that blood volume back down. On the other side, it will also decrease the amount of thirst and also decrease ADH. Therefore, your body will not want to drink in more fluids to help get rid of the fluid inside the blood system. The other condition will be when you have a low blood volume. So if it's under the normal level, what's going to happen is you're going to have an increase in the heart rate, therefore dropping down the arterial blood pressure and therefore reducing the amount of sodium in the nephron. This will then cause an increase in renin from the juxtamedullary cells in the kidney, and that will then get converted from angiotensinogen to angiotensin-1 to eventually angiotensin-2. Angiotensin-2 has two functions. Number one, it's going to affect the adrenal gland to now increase aldosterone. It's also going to affect the kidneys by causing vasoconstriction of the afferent arteriole, but the vasodilation of the efferent arteriole. So this will help you slow down the amount of filtering of the blood in the kidney, therefore stabilizing your GFR. As you hold down and stabilize or decrease GFR, you should also have a decrease in urine output, conserving whatever blood volume you have. On the other leg, don't forget that the aortic arch and the carotid sinus also has baroreceptors, and because you're changing the way the blood flow, you're decreasing the arterial blood pressure. The sensors inside your brain, including your hypothalamic osmoreceptors, are going to increase thirst and trigger the release of antidiuretic hormone, which will also increase the amount of salt and water retention. And that will then ultimately help you conserve water in your body, so you reduce the amount of urine output. Changes in plasma osmolarity. Key control points include the hypothalamic osmoreceptors, which will then increase thirst and release antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and the kidneys, which will then cause urine formation and the solute and water loss. Let's take a look at two conditions. If we have high osmolarity, which means there's a lot of stuff inside our blood, the hypothalamic osmoreceptors are going to increase the thirst and of course increase ADH. Increased ADH within the blood results in the production of lesser volume of higher concentrated urine, whereas a decreased amount of ADH results in the production of greater volume of less concentrated urine. ADH binds the receptors of the principal cells inside the collecting tubules and collecting ducts and increase the migration of aquaporins, therefore increasing water intake. In the kidneys, it's going to cause a decrease in retention, therefore balances out to keep normal osmolarity. Let's say you have low osmolarity, or not a lot of stuff inside the blood. The hypothalamic receptors are going to then decrease thirst and decrease ADH. This will then affect the kidneys to have an increased water retention. And because you have reduced ADH, there's also going to be a reduced amount of water aquaporin channels and reduced water intake. This will then normalize and maintain normal osmolarity.